Good afternoon. Today I will be doing an informative speech on the invasive species of Florida. Have you ever walked outside and saw a plant or an animal and thought, you don't belong here? You may in fact be correct. According to WLRN, there are at least 130 non-native reptiles and amphibians currently residing in Florida, and that number doesn't even include fish, birds, mammals, or even plants. You may be asking yourself, well, how did they get here? And the answer, of course, is people. From the Spanish conquistadors to the neighbor next door with a python, you will find that vast majority of non-native flora and fauna our people are responsible for. We've all seen non-native species, from our backyards to the national parks and beaches. They're all around us. Ever wonder where the cute little green tree frogs went that hung out near your porch light? The white Cuban tree frog probably ate them. Or what about all those iguanas down in the Keys? They too are non-native and highly invasive. What about the pepper trees? Not only can cause rashes on your skin, but according to Florida Today, some people have even reported respiratory problems during its blooming season. From the 1600s onward, people continue to introduce non-native invasive species that may thrive in our subtropical climate, but are still a danger to it. You may be asking yourself, what defines a plant or animal as invasive? And the answer is relatively simple. They are species non-native to a specific location, and they have a tendency to spread and cause damage to the native flora and fauna of an environment they were put in. Astoundingly, there are over 500 non-native species in Florida, and 126 animals and 194 plants have been identified by the state agencies as invasive. Throughout the course of Florida's history, settlers and now native Floridians have been bringing over non-native invasive species that, quite frankly, just don't belong here. The invasion of Florida began with the Spanish conquistadors, and while they brought over many good non-native things like the oranges we're well known for, they also brought over many invasive species as well, like wild hogs that run around today. According to the Smithsonian Marine Station at Fort Pierce, another factor contributing to the invasive exotic crisis in Florida is the fact that the state is an important transportation and shipping hub. Fully 85% of the hundreds of millions of live plants imported to the U.S. utilized Miami as the port of entry. Most of the exotic animals shipped to the U.S. for the pet trade also pass through Florida. It's not just the settlers or the mass shipping and transportation we do either. Most people don't think about their pet snake being invasive either. Copious amounts of exotic plants and animals have been released into Florida, while either intentionally or through negligence. The Orlando Sentinel states that about 100,000 Burmese pythons were imported to the United States between 1996 and 2006. And as we all well know now, that these snakes get enormous, and your average pet holder in the 90s probably wasn't equipped to handle a 15-foot long snake, so they released it. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, what exactly does that mean for the environment? The native animals we love to spot as we're exploring the national parks. The problem with invasive species is that our native environment, they don't have any natural predators to take care of them and continue the food chain. So they're left unchecked like a toddler with magic markers and nice white walls. And one of our biggest problems right now on the Space Coast are the cane toads. Native to South America, these little guys look a lot like our native southern toad. These toads breed year-round and can be found in backyards, canals, and ponds. The cane toads were actually brought here in the 1930s to control agricultural pests, and the current population is believed to be a result of pet escapes in the 50s and 60s. The problem is that their secretions are highly toxic to animals, and dogs end up being their victims more often than not. According to Florida Fish and Wildlife site, the FWC encourages landowners to kill cane toads on their own property whenever possible. Unfortunately, this is currently the only way to get rid of these pests. We also have many plant species attacking our own. Pepper trees, camphor trees, and skunk vine are only a few to name, but the most infamous is the kudzu vine. Originally from East Asia, this plant was brought over in the early 1900s. The kudzu vine was originally used as an ornamental plant and to stop erosion. Unfortunately, it rapidly started choking out whole stands of trees, growing a foot a day. The vine is even tough to kill, let alone eradicate, and the University of Florida says that total eradication is necessary to prevent regrowth. A number of chemicals can be used to control the kudzu, but most homeowners use non-selective products containing glyphosate. Herbicide treatments will likely need to be repeated until an acceptable control is achieved. Invasive species have and will continue to have different impacts on both humans and the environment they're in, especially here in Florida. There are all kinds of different invasive species that were brought over by settlers, current shipping and transportation, or negligent pet owners. These species are a threat to our native environment, pets and humans alike. As it stands now, there are at least 320 invasive plants and animals recorded, and quite possibly many more that researchers haven't documented yet. Invasive species are an interesting and unfortunate part of our ecosystem now, and Florida Fish and Wildlife does their best to keep tagging and binding them.